think good relation to the mic here?
Well, let's try it out.
Okay. I don't want to whack my
No.
Take the mute off. You gotta take the mute off.
Is he testing it now? I'll play without a mute. That's good? Where I am?
All right. Can I have
single flower he sent me since we met. Only his messenger he chose, departed pure with scented dew still wet, one perfect rose. I know the language of the floweret, but the lips instead his heart enclose. Love has taken for his amulet one perfect rose. Why is it no one ever sent me yet one perfect limousine, do you suppose? Oh no, it's always just my luck to get one perfect rose. Oh, mistress mine, where are you roaming? Oh, stay and hear your cherubs coming that can sing perfect low. Trip no further, pretty sweeting, journeys end in lovers' meeting. Every wise man's son doth know. What is love? 'Tis not hereafter. Present mirth and present laughter. What's to come is still unsure. In delay there lies no plenty. Then come kiss me sweet and 20. Youth's a staff will not endure. Youth's a staff will not endure. have a heart shall support me still. Don't ask me why I send thee here, the firstling of the infant year. Don't ask me what the primrose shows be burned thus with morning dew. I must whisper in thy ears the sweets of love are washed with tears. This lovely native of the vale, thou seest her languid, pensive pale. Thou seest this bending stalk so weak that each way yielding doth not break. I must tell thee these recall the doubts and fears a lover feels. Now droops the milk-white peacock like a ghost, and like a ghost she glimmers unto me. Now lies the earth all damned to the stars, and all thy heart lies open unto me. Now slides the silent meteor on, and leaves a shining furrow as thy thoughts in me. Now folds the lily all her sweetness up,
Still have a couple folks coming in the back, so I'll wait 1 second. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see all of you and meet a number of you, and hope to meet the rest of you that I haven't said hello to afterwards. My name is Steve Keighton. I'm one of Bob's nephews. I'm from Virginia. My father's Jim Keighton, one of Bob's younger brothers. And along with George Keighton, which I think a lot of you know George. George is another one of Bob's nephews, whose father was Leslie Keighton. George is from the Philadelphia area. We want to welcome you here. Thank you for coming. It means a lot that you're here. A lot of words you've already shared with George and us have meant so much. So we thank you so much for being here today. And not just you here in the room, but for those of you on Zoom, hello, I guess that's the camera over there. We appreciate all of you being here today. George and I are the only family members that are here in person today. Some of the family is on Zoom, but they're all in different states, from North Carolina to Delaware to Pennsylvania. So it was hard for them to travel this far, but they're with us on Zoom, and a lot of his other friends and family. We consider a lot of you his Massachusetts family. You know, we didn't get up to visit him a whole lot in Massachusetts, but we were very grateful for his huge family over the many decades here in Massachusetts. So again, thank you for being here. I have a few things to kind of announce and a couple things to open with before we begin a lot of the remembrances. I do want to first acknowledge Stonehill College for allowing us to use this facility. They've been amazing. Doug Smith over here, say hi to Doug at some point if you haven't met him already. Christine DaCosta with the advancement department have been just fantastic in allowing us to do this. So thank you so much again. This has just been wonderful. I think Bob would have appreciated being here at Stonehill College. If you don't know, he taught part-time here in the 70s and 80s for several years and kept a close connection to Stonehill over all those years. And of course, as many of you know, he also taught at Curry College for over 50 years. But his connection with Stonehill was special to him as well. So we're very grateful to have it here. Also, the AV team, I don't remember everybody's name, but Kevin, Mike, and everybody else, thank you so much. They're running the Zoom, and have done a lot of other setup here, so we really appreciate you folks as well. Thanks. The intention, or I guess the plan for the service, as you can see in the program, is really focused on remembrances, stories. I mean, you all know Bob was a great storyteller, and we want to hear a lot of stories and memories of Bob. That's going to be largely what the service is about. We hope there's a lot of humor, too, so we'll pause for laughter. I hope there's a lot of that. But there'll also be music, of course, throughout the service. You've seen his paintings in the back. You'll get another chance to look at some of those as well. So we wanted to have a little bit of everything who Bob was as part of the service. I will mention the music that you heard during the prelude as you came in was all composed by Bob, if you didn't know that already, and performed by Beth Canterbury, soprano, singing soprano, and then Matthew Larson on piano. So there's a CD that they put out with all these little mini operas that Bob wrote. So that's what you heard. I also want to thank both Frank and Ginny Grimes, who will be performing some music during the service. And they go way back with Bob. I think you were his violin teacher, is that right, Frank, for many years? Yeah, so we're very pleased to have them performing some music for us, because music, of course, was very, very important to Bob. I was going to mention that Beth and Matthew Larson, who you heard earlier, performed many times at Curry College. Bob had established the Keighton Fund series of events at Curry College, and they were frequent performers there. So he was really close to them. As far as the slides, hopefully you got to see many of those. We're going to run them again at the end during the postlude, so feel free to, if you didn't see them before, kind of hang out here and look at those for a while you listen to the postlude music, and then we can wander into the back and have some more conversation and look at the paintings some more after that. The other thing I wanted to mention, if you weren't already aware, that after we're done here, many of us are going to be heading over to Stone Forge Grill, which is just around the corner down on Washington Street. Hopefully many of you can make it. This is one of Bob's favorite places to go. And so the entire staff knows Bob there. So if you can join us, that would be great. I think we've got 30 or more, room for 30 or more folks. So I mean, if all of you came, I think we could fit you in, but we understand that some of you have other places to go. So just come on over. I think we can be there as early as noon. So depending on what time we end, hang out here a little bit, chat, look at the paintings, and then we'll start to head over there at noon. And then following that, if you're interested, Harvey Robbins, Harvey, right there. Many of you know Harvey. Harvey and Bob are very instrumental in helping to preserve the Prowse Farm. And so Harvey's agreed to arrange a tour and help host a tour up at Prowse Farm, which is up in the Canton-Milton area near the Blue Hills, right? We'll let you know if you want to go where exactly the address is. But that will be following Stoneforge Grill. 2:15, 2:30, I think is what we said. We could be an arrival time there. So hopefully some of you can make it, but let me or George know if you plan to come up there after Stoneforge Grill. I've never seen the museum up there, so I've heard a lot of good things about it. I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Gonna take a deep breath here. I think that's it for the announcements. Other than if you have a cell phone, make sure it's in silent mode if you would. It would be just nice not to have bells and whistles going off. I think I did that with mine right here. The one final thing I was going to mention is that we do, as you see on your program, we have a number of folks that will come up and provide some words and some remembrances. But you can also see that after that, near the end of the program, we have some time for anybody else that wants to say something. If you're so moved to say a few words, what we're going to do first, though, is probably open that up to the people on Zoom to say what they want to, and then, time permitting, we'll take some folks here. Hopefully, if we squeeze everybody in, we'll see how we're doing on time. We might have to keep words brief, but we want to hear from anybody that wants to speak. So we'll hopefully give you that time. So to get us started, I'm really happy to have Bob's other nephew, George Keighton, who I think most people know, come up and say a few words. So thanks, George.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning. My name is George Keighton. I want to begin by thanking everyone here for your presence today, whether you're here in person or on Zoom, or perhaps watching this at a later time. Many of you know Bob as a teacher, an artist, a musician, a writer, a poet, an all-around Renaissance man. I would like to take this opportunity to say a few words about what he meant to me as an uncle. Bob and my dad, Leslie, were the closest of siblings, sharing many of the same passions in art, music, poetry, and history. Nothing could compare to the infectious energy whenever they are in the same room together, sharing timeless stories, often accompanied by raucous laughter. To someone who never had a big family, Bob was like a second father to me. My dad had me late in life, and I never had an opportunity to meet my grandparents, but Bob was also much like a grandparent to me as well. As a child, I always looked forward to his visits from Massachusetts. When I was little, he would often read me stories, such as Green Eggs and Ham. Even as our extended family gatherings at Christmas fell by the wayside, he made our holidays whole whenever he was in town. From a young age, both Bob and my dad instilled in me a deep appreciation for history. When I was 7, we took a trip to Monticello and also to Mount Vernon, where I was given the opportunity to lay a wreath on George Washington's tomb. The year was 1999, 200 years after George Washington's death. As he would later relay to me, it became a running gag of sorts in his classes that he would tell his students he attended George Washington's funeral. But while his life experience may not have gone back quite that far, it did cover a large swath of American history, beginning when his father took him to an FDR rally at Shibe Park in Philadelphia in 1944 at the age of 13. But his passion for history extended far beyond the scope of American government. He was also the authority on our family history. Between Bob and my dad and myself, we fought to save and restore the house in Swarthmore that had been in our family for 120 years, a project that I now remain committed to finishing. Perhaps the quality I admired most about Bob was the everlasting sense of optimism he imparted. It is impossible to have a negative feeling when you are in the room with him. He could have the briefest of interactions with you, even a simple hello, and make you feel good for the rest of the day. When I lost my parents in 2020, Bob was who I turned to each evening for a comforting voice. For the past 2.5 years, I made a point of calling him every night, and I cherished every conversation we had. Even after his layoff from his teaching job during the pandemic, he showed no hint of taking his foot off the gas. At the age of 90, he drew up a resume in search of new work, which I have a copy of here. The last 2 years of his life were perhaps some of his most prolific, during which he published his political memoirs and devoted even more time to his art studio, where he had found so much joy over the years. I invite everyone to view some of his paintings we have in the back after the service, including his most recent unfinished work. Bob also fostered my appreciation for the arts. A very special memory I had was from August of last year, when I finally had the opportunity to go on a trip to Tanglewood with him, something I'd been wanting to do for years. We attended a 90th birthday celebration for John Williams, and also took the opportunity to visit half a dozen art museums, including the Clark, where some of Bob's favorite Impressionist works reside. I will forever be grateful that we were able to do this trip, which we completed not more than 2 weeks before Bob's cascade of health problems began. I will miss the laughs that he shared with my dad and the rest of our family, and the countless stories that he would relay of his extremely colorful life. I can say with such confidence that I can never hope to know a more perfect human being. Thank you, Bob, for all of the gifts you have shared with us. I could not have been more proud of how fully you have lived your 91 years.
Well, good morning to everybody. I just wanted to say a few words before we get started. My name is Frank Grimes, and I'm here with my lovely wife, Virginia Gingy Grimes, to play a little bit of music for you, because music was so important to Bob. I would like to, first of all, thank George and Steve for very thoughtful planning, and I think a very necessary meeting of all of us to be able to deal with the loss of Bob. He's a good man. I miss him a great deal. So I'm sure you know that one of Bob's great passions in life was playing the violin. And I was his violin teacher for about 10 years. He was devoted to practicing. I'm sure he went home every night and practiced, which is very seldom happens when anybody studies the violin. I also was always impressed by the fact that he was so concerned with guarding his violin. I mean, I've known people who've owned Stradivari and Guarneri and fine, priceless antique instruments who didn't take care of the fiddles like Bob did. So we also know that one of his great passions in life was the love of opera. He often told me that he would drive somewhere, maybe to his art studio, maybe to one of his other favorite restaurants, Christo's, which he mourned a great deal when they closed. And then he would end up sitting in the parking lot for 10 minutes because he was listening to his Sirius radio. He was hearing the last final bit of Daughters of the Regiment, or Valkyrie, or whatever it was. And he absolutely couldn't leave without the final chords from that opera. Now, that always made me think about what it would have been like to help Bob buy his car. You know, most people, most people fuss over the color. Do we want vinyl seats? Do we want leather seats? You know, they'd be out kicking the tires and wondering whether it could go to 0 or 60 in 2 seconds. Bob just had to make sure the radio worked right. And he had a series radio. It could always turn on to something or other of interest. Now, we can't do an opera for you today. We'd like to play a lovely aria, a famous aria, from Handel's 1743 opera Semele. And this is a story about a Theban princess who was the only mortal to be a parent of a god. This is a lovely and peaceful aria. I've always found it very comforting. And I first discovered it but when sung on the old scratchy disc by the late, great Irish tenor, John McCormick, in his early days. And he was one of the great voices, I believe, you know, certainly one of the great Irish tenors. So we would like to play for you, Where'er You Walk. Very few words. An aria is for expressing air and lots of notes with not too many words. Where'er you walk, cool gales shall fan the glade. Trees where you sit shall crowd into a shade. Where'er you tread, the blushing flowers shall rise, and all things flourish where'er you turn your eyes.
Thank you both. That was beautiful. I'm going to be sharing a few poems at various intervals throughout the program here. They're all by Bob's grandmother, Alice Hall Paxson. From what I understand, Bob was very close to his grandmother, and I think probably developed a lot of his love of poetry from her, and I'm sure some other influences, but I think she was an amazing poet. There's a whole book of her poems here. I'm just going to read a couple. This one is called As the Evening Shadows Fall. As we climb the hills to the westward on the path that all must take, don't miss the glowing colors that through the shadows break. For the same sun shines at even as gives the morning glow, and the face of age may have beauty that youth can never know. The secret is how the traveler has spent the journey's way. The things we gather within us tell the story of the day. These paint upon our faces the radiance of the sun, or troubles deep and darksome which we have not overcome. O be ye at the gateway which leadeth into life, or at the glowing exit from all its varied strife. Hold on to the light triumphant, which comes from the Lord of all. Go gaily over the mountain as the evening shadows fall. Well, the first remembrance in this next group here is from his sister June Keighton Furlow, who lives in Pennsylvania and couldn't make it, but she asked if I would read just a couple of short words and really a very special memory of her brother Bob. So it reads, I am June Keighton Furlow, Bob's sister. I would like to share with you a special memory. On Christmas Day, our family gathered together, including my two aunts, which would be their father's sisters. I knew them as Mara and Erm. Bob and his younger brother Leslie, George's father, always gave their two aunts a gift together and a little poem that was composed to go along with the gift. And this happened every Christmas, and I think they did it with other folks too, but especially the two aunts got these wonderful poems. All these poems reflected Bob's sense of humor. I kept some of these poems, and by the way, they're all in the back there by the paintings. The poems were read aloud before the gift was opened, and we couldn't wait to hear them. So this is a sample of one of Bob and Leslie's poems, and the gift was a box of candy. For two girls who are young and sweet, here is a delicious treat. When the box is empty, alas, alack, fill it with money and give it back. That was a perfect example of many of his poems. So, all right, next, if Harvey would come up, that would be great. You're next, yep. Thank you.
Harvey Robbins, thank you for coming. Today we celebrate the life of a perfect person. All of you know of the artistic, creative, delicate side to Bob. Beloved professor for 50 years, composer, artist, rendered probably 100 paintings, author of 9 books, poet, violinist, pianist, opera singer. Most of you have heard of the other side of Dr. Keighton, but I want to give you a little bit of an insight because it's something you couldn't have lived. Bob was a ferocious, tenacious, uncompromising, zealous advocate for what he believed was right. 40 years ago, we crossed paths for the first time at Trailside Museum, where a group of us, knowing not what to do, just desired to see this historic farm preserved. We had no idea the obstacles ahead. We went to the State House once where a former Representative Joe Semensi said, at best, your chance of winning at 1 in a million. That was enough for us. We did not know the power of a blue-chip, multi-billion-dollar corporation, Motorola, the billion-dollar wholly-owned subsidiary of Motorola called Codex, town officials who were on the take, a local media that set the tone for fake news. But we did not know that the greatest force against us would be an ally. Bob Keighton had been a friend of Mike Dukakis. They had gone to Swarthmore, not the same year, but graduated together. He served on his committees. He was a dedicated friend. And in a cold winter December morning, Dukakis invited Dave Cowens from the Celtics, another brother, myself, Joanne, and Bob to his home in Perry Street in Brookline. He sat there in a gray, huddled sweater. The heat in the house was not on. And lo and behold, he certainly have no intentions of offering a cup of tea or coffee, but we didn't care about that. And he said, if you help get me back in as governor, I swear I will preserve Prowse Farm. It'll be my priority. We were elated, and we accomplished that mission. But later on in life, he decided he wanted to run for president. And he was to betray us. When that happened, and he allowed a green light for development on the property, Bob and I dedicated ourselves to the quest to shadow Dukakis every step, every city, every town that he ran for his presidency. From Iowa at the first caucus, where Dukakis came off the plane and was first greeted by the questions, "What have you done to Prowse Farm?" He was stunned. Miraculously, and I use that word very carefully, we were able to get to the floor of the Republican National Committee, 2 Democrats, at least at the time, no credentials, and were able to get the floor of the Superdome, and hand out the literature to everybody in the national media. They took that literature and flooded newspapers throughout the country repeatedly, showing the cowardice and the betrayal of a man who said he was Mr. Integrity. Prowse Farm was so vitally important to Dr. Keighton. He received a phone call from a man named Jim French, who was a right-hand man to Dukakis. And the conversation went exactly like this. Bob, Mike is appealing to you to leave this all alone. And whatever you want, whatever you need, whatever you ask for is yours. What do you want? And Bob's answer was, nothing. Because you couldn't move a rock. Well, Prowse Farm today has 44 preserved acres at the foot of Blue Hill. We've developed a museum, which you're invited to visit after the service and lunch. And as a purely volunteer, completely volunteer, no salaries, no benefits, we have raised $34 million for charities at the farm over the years. That's what Brother Bob did. The other side of him, the other side of my brother, a perfect person. Thank you.
speak through my forehead. Good morning. I'm Janet Borden. And last month, I lost a very dear friend and colleague. Bob was one of my first students when I started my art studio 36 years ago. He had a passion for life, and when he found something he loved, he put his heart and soul into it. Whether it was politics, music, teaching, writing, or painting, he pursued it with fire and dedication. As a student of painting, he not only worked regularly at his craft, he traveled all over studying the masters at museums around the Northeast and beyond. He recently estimated that he and his good friend Bill Flavin had visited at least 47 museums in New England alone. Occasionally, we went on field trips to local museums. I remember a trip to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. He and Anna, who's sitting over here and has greeted you as you came in today, he and Anna and I went into the Museum of Fine Arts armed with art supplies. We were all in the Impressionist galleries copying Monet's. I had a box of colored pencils in my lap, copying A Field of Poppies, when I made the mistake of standing up to get a closer look at the painting. My box of colored pencils crashed to the marble floor and began noisily rolling around. Now, I understood Anna bolting from the room, stifling her laughter. But one would think that Bob, ever the gentleman, would rush to my aid. But I glanced over to see that he had suddenly taken an intense interest in a Renoir on the opposite wall. He had his hand up, blocking his profile from me, and his shoulders were suspiciously shaking. As I crawled around on the gallery floor chasing rolling pencils, he laughed himself silly 20 feet from me. He was still chuckling when we went to lunch an hour later. Bob became a wonderful and prolific painter, as is evidenced behind us. Eventually, he decided he needed a studio of his own, not only for a place to paint without depending on me, but also because his apartment had no more room for paintings. After a couple of moves throughout the building, we wound up side by side in side-by-side studios right off the classroom. Often when I was teaching, I'd hear the distinctive cadence of his footsteps coming down the hallway. When he got close, I'd call out, "Good morning, Bob." I'd hear his chuckle before he'd call back, "Good morning, Sherlock." Then he'd round the corner with his broad smile, happy and anxious to start painting. He was always there to encourage and compliment other artists and students. He loved watching the progress of everyone's paintings and drawings and was always delighted to see their finished works. No one was more enthusiastic with praise than Bob. We will miss him asking, "Is it done? It looks done." And saying, "Look at all the detail, ooh." Last year, when we needed to move out of our accommodations, we found the perfect office building to house both of our studios. He was delighted with his new studio and spent as much time painting as he could. He was no longer next door, but just down the hall. The hallway is carpeted, but I could still hear his footsteps heading down to greet me and my students. "Good morning, Bob." "Good morning, Sherlock." Over the last few months, as he struggled to recover from the various health issues plaguing him, he talked often about his desire to get back to a studio to paint. He never stopped believing he would. I believed that he would. But alas, that was not meant to be. Anyone who knew Bob knows what a truly amazing man he was. A consummate storyteller, a brilliant mind, a much-loved and admired college professor, a skilled musician, as well as the talented artist that I knew and loved. Bob was a good friend, a constant supporter. He was sweet and kind, generous and good-natured. I'll miss his hearty laugh and his broad smile, his wit and his wisdom. Most of all, I'll miss his footsteps. I'll miss you, Bob. The studio will never be the same without you.
Thank you all. This next short poem by Alice Hall Paxson is simply titled To W.I.H., which we believe might have been her brother. As in these short November days, I'll start over. There we go. You're fine. My fault. I'll start over. As in these short November days, the slant rays of the sun have turned to gold the falling yellow leaves, and touched to glowing crimson the oak leaves everywhere. So on this college campus, these many years, the always cheery presence of this our radiant friend has lighted up the faces and the hearts of all who met him there. Let this our loving tribute be, thanks be to God for sunshine and such men as he. This was written in Swarthmore.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Ken Teitelbaum. I'm a former student of Dr. Keighton. When I was asked to speak today, I immediately jumped at the chance. This is, after all, a celebration of life, and rarely have I encountered a life more worthy of celebration than someone who has been my mentor, my teacher, my friend for 44 years. Many of you knew him as Bob, but since 1979, for my brothers and fellow alumni Bob Hoffman and Jim Cass, for my wife Kimberly and my daughter Jessica, he has always been simply the doctor. Because even though I had many professors in school, he was, is, and ever will be held in such reverence and love that the simple title is his alone. As many of you have already noted, author, musician, activist, teacher, artist. One of the last times I saw the doctor, he took me to his art studio, and as we stood there and examined the paintings, he was rightfully beaming with pride at the art that had been born of his heart and hands. He carefully noted and recalled the locations of several works. Even now, I still hear his raucous laugh when he would share a story, a witty quote from some historical figure. The stories that involved him could fill a book. If you will allow me a moment to relate to one of my favorites, and I have to add a disclaimer here, I cannot speak to the veracity of the story, but it was told to me by the doctor. And the story that he told me was that for many years, he had talked about always wanting to capture the interest of his students in a new class. And he thought of different ways to do that. And his idea was that he thought, you know what, I'm going to, on the first day of a class, I'm going to wear a pair of roller skates. And I'm going to skate into the room and really capture people's attention. And then I'm going to, really get their involvement right from the beginning. And it was a brilliant idea. And I asked him many years later, I said, did you ever do that? Did you ever actually roller skate in class? He said, yeah. Unfortunately, I planned badly. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I chose to do it on the very first day of class, which made sense, but unfortunately, being that the summer break had just ended, they had waxed the floors. And he said, so I put on the roller skates down the hall, and I roller skated down the hall and into the room, but unfortunately, because of the waxing, I couldn't stop. So he said, so I roller skated through the room, turned around, roller skated back out, and he said, I couldn't stop. And he said, and then I was so embarrassed, I just canceled the class that day. I thought, maybe don't do that anymore. He said, oh, no, I would never, no. When asked about his legacy, he simply had this to say, I hope when it's all said and done, they say I was a good teacher. Doctor, let me assure you, you were a good teacher. To my mind, there has been no better, and I love you, my friend. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Trevor Smith, and I'm also a former student of Bob Keighton. Bob was a mentor, professor, and most importantly to me, a friend. I remember the first time I met Doc K, as we called him back then. When I was a first-year student at Curry College, I was attending a transfer orientation for transfer students at the time. And I was really nervous. I just didn't know anybody at that point on campus, and I was just a mess. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, this really friendly-looking gentleman with a big smile on his face came up to me and introduced me. He introduced him to me. Right away, he put me at ease. At that point, I felt more comfortable being part of this college community. As a student at Curry, I kept on seeing him around campus, and he would always go out of his way to say hello to me. And he would come up to me and say, how are your classes going? How are things going? I always appreciate that. I eventually ended up going to his office on campus on a regular basis. And I was really fascinated with all the stories he used to tell me about all the famous people he met. And especially, he would always talk about this college in Texas and the stories he used to tell me about teaching there at this very, it was really so interesting to me. I remember talking at length about this college in Texas for some reason. And often these office visits would turn into support sessions for me, actually. He was always very supportive of me and what I was doing with my life and with, my major, and also he was always like a sounding board whenever I was going through a difficult time. After my years at Curry, I kept in touch with Bob. I was living at Boston after I got through Curry and went to graduate school, and he was really the person who really kind of exposed me to all the arts and the culture in the Boston area. He would take me to all these art museums, to Boston and beyond. I've never been to many art museums in my life. Those ones with Bob, that's for sure. And then he also introduced me to Tanglewood. We used to go out there for concerts in the summertime. But what I miss the most about Bob is his infectious sense of humor. He was always telling very funny and very long stories. I will really miss him dearly, but I really feel so grateful to have known him. Thank you.
Thank you for adjusting this microphone here. I don't have to mess with them. My name is John Henry, the other one. Not that one. Just so we get that straight. I'm a friend of Bob's, and my wife Karen, sitting over in the back there, though, has them. Put your arm up, Karen, so they can all see you. She's the actual student who went to Curry, graduated in '88, and has had a lifetime, certainly an adult relationship lifetime period with Dr. Keighton. And consisted of all kinds of things. We went to lunch together. We would meet, telephone calls, frequent interaction. And even up until lately, when he was in the nursing home and then ultimately in the South Shore Hospital, and we were with him the day he passed away, later that day. So for Karen, it's been a long experience. For me, not so long. I went to Providence College. I didn't go to Curry, and I graduated in 1967, and went in the Army for a career in engineering, which I'm still doing. So I'm not an artist or a poet or all those swell things. And I'm not knocking it, but I'm reminded of what Tom Lehrer used to say, the song and dance guy from Boston. He was one of those people that make you realize how little you've accomplished in your life. And it was about somebody he was singing about. In my case, I related to Bob through his music and his passion for music. And it became really apparent when we were invited to a concert under the Keighton series that was held at Curry, and the Borromeo String Quartet played. And they did a transcription of Bach's Goldberg variations, which were made originally for the keyboard, not the stringed instruments. And I was kind of horrified by that. I mean, it's so iconoclastic to take something that just can't be changed or altered and put it in a transcription form for strings. To the point where at the intermission I went to the green room and I talked to the leader, the first violinist of the quartet, and saying, "What are you doing? How can you alter something that could not possibly be altered?" And at that point, I think it was the 6th performance that they had done in public of this transcription. And it had a few rough spots in it, so it needed a little work, but on the whole, it was very successful. So I got to talking to them, and he said, "Well, John, how many string quartets did Bach write?" I said, "Well, none that I know of." I said, "Well, you've got your answer. That's why we did this transcription." So my point was that Bob had everything to do with arranging this concert, and it was something that would, of great artistic value, first of all, and it would make you think about what you're listening to, and you wouldn't be in the back seat somewhere, because he was very attentive at listening to the radio, as was mentioned. And in my household, when I grew up, in spite of ending up in engineering, we were all musically oriented because my father was a good amateur pianist, and it was sort of incumbent on everybody, if you know what's good for you, that you learn how to play an instrument, and all 6 of us did learn how to play an instrument. Mine happened to be the piano. And I was fortunate that my father was very generous with his time and took us to Symphony Hall and some of the other venues to hear some of the very great pianists of the world. So when I met Bob following our marriage about 8 years ago now, we have a lot of discussions about the great musicians that we had heard, and in quite some detail. So you realize that you're getting more out of it than just passing the time of day or supporting subscriptions for a concert series. You're there to listen carefully and listen critically. So later on, my mother-in-law became sick and eventually died. We were taking care of her. And in her things, we found in a record of the month club kind of thing, there was a disc, and the disc was a recording of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony transcribed for piano. So I said, "Well, Bob sicked the Goldberg variations on me and challenged me with that. I'm going to send this to him." And I warned him, "Listen, you've got to go to the bathroom, have some food before you sit down and listen to this thing. Have a drink of water, because it's an hour long." And it was recorded in a church basement by a very well-known pianist, but no self-respecting record company would do it, because it was something that you just wouldn't do. How are you going to transcribe the Ninth Symphony with the choral singers and all that for the piano? Well, it was done by Liszt. So if anybody could do it, Liszt had the capability of doing that, and he actually did very well. I didn't know until a lot of discussions with Bob about that and the efficacy of making these transcriptions, that Liszt had in fact transcribed all 9 of Beethoven's symphonies for the piano. So those were the kind of discussions that we had, and we talked a lot about the Curtis Institute. It's a keyboard institute in Philadelphia, very world-class conservatory, and the people that he knew and the ones that we had heard that were graduates and performed in the great concert halls of the world. So it was my privilege to be a friend of his, not for that long a period, but I like the challenge of somebody who challenges you to why you believe and listen to something and consider it great or throw it in the trash heap and start all over again. He was a great man, a great friend, and we will miss him very much. Thank you very much.
I have a bit of a prepared script to read here, but with all of these stories, I'm torn away to do what I specialize in, go on tangents. I'm so glad that somebody mentioned the name of Bill Flavin. They were very, very close, and they really had tremendous love of music together. That made me think of, needing to go to the bathroom before the concert. He said that he and Bill went to, I think, one of the broadcasts from the Metropolitan of one of the great Ring Cycle by Wagner. And these, of course, can be endless, But he said, he struggled through it. After he's coming out, Bill had a big smile on his face. He said, "Oh, that was so great. I could listen to it all over again right now." And the other thing that was a little reminiscent, all of Bob's love of painting, how much he loved the Brandywine Valley. Really did love it. And he was always taking pictures there so he could bring them home and elicit memories of how he wanted to paint them. So that was sort of in my mind when I was thinking about what's play here, these Sally Gardens. Nobody really knows where the Sally Gardens are, what was meant by that. It probably had to do with the English word for willows and something down by the waterside, the stream, and so forth. But it's a very, very plaintive piece, but it always appealed to me. So I mentioned that, that one of Bob's great passions in life was love of words. And on occasion, before a lesson, and I never knew quite what was going to trigger this, Bob would just be so excited he had to recite Sir Walter Scott's Lochinvar. Got so excited when the young Lochinvar rode up on his white horse and rescued his love from the marriage of somebody else that he didn't want. He couldn't wait to recite Lochinvar. Well, he also told me that in the evenings, he would go home and he would thumb through his verses of poetry, just trying to find the right verse to read to his students the next morning or to set to a new composition. And he said that when he found a poem that moved him, he immediately knew what sounds, how he was going to set the text. That, of course, is a big problem for many composers. How do you set the text? Now, another thing in mind with this, Sally Gardens, it's a love song, again, very plaintive, but it was, we're playing an arrangement by Benjamin Britten, who wrote it for his great musical partner, Peter Pears, and it was a setting of poetry by William Butler Yeats in 1899. Now, the words are a result of Yeats' own digesting of a reconfigured poem remembered by an old woman, an old Irish woman from, and I don't know if I say this right, the village of Ballyscodare in County Sligo. I think it's one of the most beautiful airs, very plaintive, as I say, and one of the final words, not particularly appropriate to Bob, but he's talking, this fellow is talking about lost love and choices that you make and how life leads you in a different direction. I was young and foolish, And now he's full of tears for the fact that he could have been doing other things. Bob wouldn't have been that way. Bob was full of passion. He had every indication at our lesson that he was going to last another 20 years and have lots to do and always have something to do when he got up in the morning. He would not be retiring and wondering when the next world was coming. I give him a great deal of credit for that. We would like to play for you the Benjamin Britten arrangement of the Sally Gardens.
Thank you. The last poem I'm going to read from Alice Hall Paxson, Bob's grandmother, is titled In Memory of a Beautiful Life. The wheat fields are green with the freshness of June. The rivers, rain-fed, run strong. Life in its fullness, with flower and leaf, all around us vibrates to the song of the ages, growth, always growth. Just as from the spring where the great river starts, human eyes cannot glimpse where it enters the sea. So when life leaves the boundaries known to us here, we cannot in fullness vision it free. Free for growth, always growth. The life just closed has run its course with fullness and with wisdom. About its spirit's future, doubt there cannot be. Then let us gather up the harvest it has left us of high thoughts, patience, justice, love for you and me, a part of that creative growth which is eternity. So at this point, we would like to open it up for folks to say a few words if you're so moved. We're going to start with those who are on Zoom, and we'll just, I guess what we'll try to do is, if you have something you want to say, raise your hand. The mics will be open, so your mics will be open, so if you're not talking, try to be as quiet as you can. Keep the words fairly brief, but we want to hear from as many people as possible. So if anybody on Zoom would like to say something, raise your hand or somehow acknowledge that you have something to say. Or just start talking. So we have some comments. Should I go ahead and read the comments, I guess? This is from, well, it just went away. Chat box. From Ellen Crompton, much love to Dr. Keighton, long distance from Stonehill College South parking lot. Just that way. Years after I graduated from Curry College, frequently his smile would greet my husband and I at Christo's. That's great. But we'd love to hear from folks if you're willing to say something. And
I'll just give greetings from Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. We represent many dozens of people in support of George, Bob, and the whole Keighton family. It's been a blessing to hear the words penned here in Pennsylvania, and our hearts are with you. Thank you so much for this beautiful tribute.
Thank you. Anyone else on Zoom? I see a lot of familiar faces.
I was going to say a little something, Steve. Hi, I'm
Yeah.
Cindy Keighton Knapp, one of Bob's nieces. My dad was the oldest of Bob's siblings, Charlie Keighton. And I remember most, like everyone has said, just his stories. And I remember, I think it was about a year ago, I was sitting with my son who's in his 20s, and we called Bob, and I put him on speakerphone, and I just made him tell every single story he could think of to share with my son. And I wish my two daughters had been there that night, but something just told me, to do it that night, and I'm so grateful that I did. Like everyone has said, he was just so funny and charming. But I think the thing that sticks with me the most is how empathetic he was. He laughed with you and he celebrated with you, but I remember the most how he empathized, and he was just so supportive when we went through challenges, and I'll just really miss him.
Thank you, Cindy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Canterbury. I'm the vocalist that Bob worked with often, and my recital partner, Matthew Larson. I just want to say that it's been wonderful since I knew Bob in such a particular, small, narrow way. It's been wonderful to hear all the ways that his spirit radiated in the same way through all of your lives. He was such a generous, bright light, humble, brilliant, and just the best kind of curiosity and empathy and tender-heartedness, in addition to all the creativity and wisdom. So it's been wonderful to be here today with you all.
Thank you, Beth, and thanks for letting us share the music this morning. We didn't ask you in advance. Anyone else on Zoom before we turn it over to some other folks here in the room? Okay. Well, I think we've got some folks here in the room that want to say something. You want to come on up to the podium? That would be fine. Just introduce yourself and say what you want to say. Appreciate it.
What a wonderful program today. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I enjoyed Dr. Keighton as a teacher. My name is Mark Lindy. I had him as a student here in 1980, 1981. He was my American National Government professor. Believe it or not, I still have his book, which at the time was $6.95, just to tell you how much the textbooks. It was written in '72. But I taught at I still teach at Massasoit 30 years. And I would go before my evening class to dinner at Christo's. And there he would be in the gold room. And we would sit down and talk about all the events of the day and everything from his perspective. I remember the whole Proust Farm struggle being over here. And I remember talking to him specifically about the presidential campaign of Mike Dukakis and how he was going to go every place and haunt him. That was his direct words. But he was just a joy. He helped inspire my love for teaching. I come from a family of teachers. I now teach a class over here at Stonehill. My dad taught here for 22 years. And he was just a special person and someone that really cared about his students. I wished I had still talked to him since 2015 with all the political events of the day, because I can only imagine what he would have said to me. But, and he used to always talk about his dear friend Ruth Walsh from Randolph. And that's what, I met them both at conventions, and we talked about all the different events of the day. And I did not know much about his other side, because him and I basically talked about politics and government and everything. We talked about Watergate extensively. That was one of his favorite subjects. But he was a wonderful human being with an infectious laugh and a smile and just a kind person. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
We also have I think we have a microphone that we can pass around if you don't want to come up to the podium. Are you willing to come up to the podium, either of you? Or we can get you the microphone. Yeah, come on, thanks.
So I was a student of, I'm too short for all of them. I was a student of Doc's, I think it was 83, or somewhere within 83 and 87, and probably multiple times. But I would stop at Doc's office just to have a laugh and to see how he was doing, because he was just so kind and generous, and you know, he had no time for anybody that didn't have time for him. In other words, it's time for if you weren't serious in the class, then he had no time for you. So. And I really appreciate that. I come from a line of politicians, educators, you know, real hardcore people. My father was also a concert pianist. And so there was a lot that Doc and I talked about. And it was just so nice to be able to relate to somebody outside of my world on that level. We talked about music. We talked about art, which I had grown up knowing a lot about. And we talked about and we talked about local Boston politics, which my family was involved in, and my cousin was on the Senate Ways and Means, and we just laughed and we talked, and I didn't always get an A either in the class, so you know, but he inspired me, and in a way that so many of the professors didn't, and I just want to say that. You know, and then I did do some things at Curry. When the towers crashed, I got my class together and another class together and raised some money and stuff like that. And he was there for that. And I wish I had done what my dear friend Karen had done and had more extensive. But you know, life goes on and life changes, and I. Got married and had babies pretty quickly after school, and I did see him at reunions and things like that, but what I truly want to, what comes out in my mind is that big belly laugh of his, and you would say something or you'd be laughing and he would just suddenly go, oh, you know, it would just come out, and you just couldn't help laugh with him. It just, even if it wasn't funny to you, it was just suddenly funny. It was just, so, you know, I know that he is just truly laughing with us, and he's okay, and this is okay, and even though we're mourning the fact that we can't see him again. So I just wanted to say this to the Keighton family, and I see some Curry people here. So he will be sorely missed by me, and I know Karen is in mourning, as well as John. And I want to thank you for letting me have a few minutes. So he's a great man. And above all, just one more thing. He was a great human. I mean, truly just a great human. And I've never met anyone like that in my life, and he will be with me for the rest of mine. So thank you.
Thank you. I believe the microphone, AV folks, that we can pass around. So if you'd rather not come up, I can bring this to you. And
in 1967, went on to become a teacher. I went back in the early 70s to get certified as a special ed teacher, and that's when I first met Doc Keighton. I still call him Doc Keighton. I never had him as a professor. He was not there when I was a student, unfortunately. What I know best about him is what he did to one of my students. One of my students who graduated from West Bridgewater High School, who went to Curry College. I'm not going to name the boy's name, but Doc Keighton, I think, took him under his wing. When it was time for the end of the year term paper, which can be a disaster for some kids, he suggested to this young man, why don't you run for school committee? He was a very active student when he was in high school. He was very involved in things and got organizations, things going. And, you know, this boy called me, as oftentimes I had many students do that. And he said, what do you think? I said, do it. I said, if Doc Keighton sees something in you, you've got the right to do it. Do it. He ran and he won. And he won numerous times. And from the school committee, he went on to become a member of the town selectman. I know if he could be here, he would be here. I'm sure it's because he's working. But I had the pleasure so many times of meeting Doc Keighton at some of his functions that he had with his fund that he had that he could put programs in. That's where I first got to know him. Wonderful man. I spend a lot of time on Curry campus. I still do. I'm vice chairman of the board of trustees. I'm always on campus, so I would run into him. I would see him at commencement. Always had that smile on his face. That's him right there. Perfect. Absolutely. You picked the right picture for it.
Hi, my name is Bill Nancaro, and I was the last chair of the Politics and History Department at Curry. And my predecessor, Larry Hartenian, is here. It's nice to see Larry and Patty. Good to see you again. One thing that always kind of put my own teaching career in perspective when I thought about Bob's is he literally started teaching the year I was born. And it's just humbling to think about that, but the time that represents doesn't even come close to the impact that he had on so many people. I mean, the stories of the mentoring, the stories of the, you know, not just students, but colleagues as well. And you know, you hear it here. Trevor, Trevor, we met at Tanglewood. I remember, you know, Bob said he always went to Tanglewood. I figured out we were going to be there the same weekend, and sure enough, I knew at some point he was going to be coming back, and there you guys were. So it was great to see you here today. And I remember the Borromeo concert. It was from a conversation that I had with him. He said that he knew Nicholas Kitchen, who's the violinist that you accosted in the green room. And I said, well, he's at NEC, you know, and my wife went to NEC. So I said, why don't we just call him up and see if he can, the Borromeo Quartet can perform. And we'll call a bunch of your former students and so forth, and we'll have a big party for you. And sure enough, y'all showed up, right? It was a wonderful night. It was it's just, and a tremendous tribute to him that we still have that fund there, that that will continue on. We still use it to fund artistic events every year. And we'll have an event in the spring that'll recognize Bob for the Spring Arts Weekend that we have. So that's all still going on. But obviously, when you work with someone, you have transactional things. You talk about students, talk about schedules, whatever. But there was literally no conversation that you had with him that didn't turn towards, well, I'm going to Rhode Island to Tulip Farm to paint this weekend. Or he would recite a poem off the top of his head, usually from Langston Hughes. And then, an hour later, he would have it transcribed, and he brought it down to me. I have a few pages of transcribed poems that he brought down that he recited from memory. Or talk about Eugene Onegin, his favorite opera, and so forth. The conversation always turned towards one of the incredibly fascinating aspects of his life. And I treasured every one of those conversations. And I gave some remarks at a faculty meeting the other day, just in remembrance of Bob, on Wednesday. And it was a Zoom meeting, so I made sure that I suggested one way to celebrate Bob's life was everyone have a drink in his honor. And the drink would, of course, have to be the Singapore Sling, right? And I found a recipe for the Singapore Sling. I put the link in the chat, and I encourage people to go and have a drink in Bob's name. So I encourage you all to do that as well. I can't put that in the link right now, but anyway, thank you all. It's a pleasure to hear all these stories and reminisce about Bob with all of you.
I want to say real briefly, since Nicholas Kitchen and the quartet came up, Nicholas Kitchen was a high school and middle school classmate of mine, and my father, Jim, hi Dad, taught him. Didn't teach him violin, but taught him other things. So yeah, we know Nicholas Kitchen, and Nicholas Kitchen sent me some very kind words about Bob too. So.
Hello everyone. I'm a graduate of Curry College, class of '88. Bob was my advisor for 4 years. I was a communications major. I never took a class from him, sadly. And I'm most comfortable behind a microphone in a radio station where I can't see my audience, so I'm really out of my comfort zone right now. I wanted to relay a funny story about Bob. We were on the phone together one day, and he wanted to tell me about this thing that had happened to him. He was so embarrassed. And he said that they were building a great big cinema in Randolph, big cinemaplex. And he lived in Randolph and was going somewhere and had to drive by. And the construction crew was out there. They had the construction cones everywhere. They had the police there on detail. And he ran over some of the cones. And one of them got wedged underneath his car. And he didn't know that he was dragging the cone down the street until one of the police officers pulled him over. And he was just so embarrassed, and I told him not to worry about it. I said, I hope you didn't get a ticket or anything. And he said, oh, no, it was just my pride that was hurt, not my wallet. And shortly after that, we made plans to go out to dinner. It was me, my former husband, another Curry graduate, and his wife. And we were meeting at a restaurant. And my next-door neighbor at the time in Braintree worked for McCourt Construction. He had construction cones everywhere, all over the back of his truck in his yard, so I decided to play a practical joke on Bob. I asked my neighbor if I could borrow one of the cones, and we put it in the trunk of the car. We met at the restaurant, and he never picked up on the fact that the three of us were very interested in finding out what car he was driving at the time and where we were all parked. So at some point, my former husband made an excuse that he was going to the men's room, but where he really went was back out to the car. He took the cone out of the trunk, and he wedged it under the rear bumper of Bob's car. Well, when we walked him out to his vehicle after the dinner, we made sure we did that, and he saw the cone, I think they could hear that laughter that many of you mentioned all over the parking lot. So that's a fond memory I have of Bob. Thank you.
I'm a professor at Curry, and certainly known Bob Keighton for the 21 years I've worked there. My name's Jerry Gibbs from the communication department. I just have three quick little stories about Bob. The first one goes back probably 15 years ago. we had a former alum who came back to give us a sizable donation to keep our radio station running. It was about a $100,000 gift, so it was no small amount. And we had a big ceremony giving him all sorts of plaques and accolades. And at the end of the ceremony, Bob Keighton is sitting in the back of the room, and he has this folder in his hands. So he trots up to the alum and pulls out the folder, and inside the folder, the alum had been gone from school for probably 30 years. He opens up, and he has an essay that the student wrote with an A on it. And he hands it to this alum. That was the only thing that brought tears to this man's eye, that Bob Keighton still had an essay from his time at Curry. Many times over the years, we'd walk along campus, and I always enjoyed hearing the stories. He talked about Margaret Mead coming to Curry and Ted Kennedy and some of these other big stories. And I would say, when are you going to retire, Bob? You're in your 80s now. When do you want to retire? He goes, well, who would I talk about China with? I always remember that. And the final thing I wanted to talk about was back in 2019, right before the pandemic. We had a homecoming, as we always do, and I head to the homecoming tent where the alumni would gather right off the football field, and Bob was there. And let me tell you, when the alums started to circle in, there was a line waiting to see this man. And for the next hour and a half, I just sat in awe as each person got that 5 minutes with him for an hour and a half. And that's the memory that I remember to this day, the power, the impact that this man had, and the use of both sides of his brain that we're hearing about today. Just an amazing man and somebody to live up to for years to come. Thank you.
I'm Tim Garvey, class of 73 at Curry College, and I don't have any great stories to tell about Dr. Keighton other than the fact that he was a consistent presence anytime that I went back to campus, and he was always had time to talk to whomever was there. He was involved with us in student government as well as in classes, and he was always a smiling face that was familiar if no one else was when we went back to campus. So my regret at this point is that I didn't know the other aspects of him.
Last chance for anybody on Zoom. Well, thank you all for sharing, and for those here in the room, plenty more opportunity as we close out the service in a few minutes in the back of the room as you admire his paintings, and we can tell more stories and chat, and then I hope many of you can come over to Stone Forge Grill afterwards too, so we'll continue the stories as long as we can. I think many of you probably know that Bob grew up in a family that practiced Quaker traditions and Quaker faith. And one of the Quaker traditions is, well, silent meetings. We didn't want to be silent this whole meeting because we wanted to tell stories and hear the great music. But I think George and I would like to close it out with a few moments of silence. And one of the things that's particularly Quaker is you end the silence with silence. So we'll shake hands or rub elbows or just nod to each other. George and I will start that process after a couple of moments, and we'll close that way, and then we'll stay for the postlude, and the slides will play again at that point, and then we can adjourn to the back of the room. And there's coffee and tea and water and a few chocolates. I think Bob loved chocolates. I haven't heard the chocolate stories yet, but we brought some chocolates from Hilliard's that Bob loves, so help yourself to some of those. Maybe one each. There's not enough for everybody. So, yeah, I think, yeah, anybody who wants to come to Stone Forge Grill can do that. We'll have enough room. But let George and I know in the back of the room if you plan to come to Prowse Farm. 2:15, 2:30 again is when we're going to meet there. So we kind of like to get a little head count for that. So just let us know, and then we can give you directions and all that. So we'll close out with a moment of silence now. Thank you all so much for all your words. Just one quick note for folks on Zoom. Hopefully you're still there. George did want to greet many of you, so stick around if you're willing to, while the rest of us will be back here looking at paintings. But George wants to say hi to those of you if you're willing to stay on for a few more minutes. So thanks again to everybody for being here.
Thank you.